friends, welcome to My Sew Bliss. Today I'm super excited to be partnering up with Baby Lock sewing machines and bringing you another sewing tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make this darling vest, and I made my own pattern and I'm going to show you how to make your own pattern as well. And I also did some Sashiko stitching on mine using the Baby Lock Sashiko. So I'm going to show you how I do that as well. This is a super fun project. You don't need a lot of extra stuff. You don't need your own pattern unless you want to just buy a pattern instead of making your own. But I'm really happy with how mine turned out. I think it's super cute. You can add more ties to it. You can customize it, add pockets, so many fun things. So the supplies that you will need for this project are first your sewing supplies and your fabric. I used about a yard of this fabric, this front fabric, this main fabric, and then about a yard and a half, because I also used this fabric as my binding. You can also use binding tape, which I used this is bias binding tape, double fold. So I also show you how to make it. If you just have like half a yard of fabric, you can make your own. And then if you want more ties, you might need a little more as well, but I think half a yard actually is probably enough to do that. And then in the middle of the two layers, I just used some leftover, I think it was like a cotton poly batting that I had from a quilt that I made. So if you just have some leftover batting sitting around, you don't need a ton, like these two side panels and then the back piece. That's what I put batting in. So worked out really well. And like I said, just the rest is your basic sewing supplies, unless you want to get the double fold bias tape as well or make your own. Then I am using my Baby Lock Sashiko to quilt this and to finish off the binding as well. I really love the look of this and how it turned out. And you can see a little bit on camera of how that turned out. And I did it on this as well. So super fun. I love the look of this stitching and I think it looks so good on so many different projects. So I'm excited to share this machine with you. If you don't have one, you can use a regular sewing machine as well to do whatever type of quilting you would like. So let's get started making our vests. Our first step is going to be making the pattern for our vest. So if you don't have a pattern, I'm going to show you how to make one. If you have a pattern, that is great as well. I know there's many out there you can buy, but I just wanted to show you a quick way to start making your own patterns at home. So I have a vest here. If you don't have a vest, you could also use a jacket or even a shirt. Just make sure it fits the way you want it to, and think about how the vest would fit on you and kind of go from there. It's also a good idea to do a test run with your pattern before you actually cut into the good fabric. So I just have my vest laid out. I have it folded in half. This is the front of the vest. This one has a button zipper closure, but on the one we're making, I'm just going to do binding with ties. So it's definitely going to be different. Also, the collar is going to be different. I'm not doing this collar. I'm going to, right where this seam is, I'm going to cut it off and have the binding there. So I'm going to lay it on my pattern paper and I'm going to start tracing. I'm not adding, well, I might add a tiny bit of length to mine, but because we're just doing a binding finish, you don't need to add extra for the hem unless you want to use it as a different finish. So I'm just going to very roughly sketch this. Let's see if this will show up better for you guys. Maybe. And like I said, it's just a very rough sketch and we can clean it up later. And I'm going to come in a little bit more. I want it a little bigger than the actual vest. And we need to account for our seam allowances. You can draw this out first and then add seam allowances later if you prefer that. Sometimes I just eyeball it and create my own seam allowances while I am drawing this out. But then we're going to do the same thing up the sleeve and across our shoulder seam. So you can see I have about a 5-inch, well, maybe you can see 5/8 inch right here for that shoulder seam. Now I'm gonna have to move this collar out of the way to get the shape of this collar. But if I kind of sketch it out over here and then over here, and then I'm going to come in and connect the two. And that was right on the line, so I'm actually going to want to come up 5/8 of an inch. Well, I'm actually going to want to come up 1/4 of an inch because of the binding. Again, we don't need a full seam allowance for that part to finish it off. The only thing we need a full seam allowance for is our side seams and our shoulder seams because they're going to be sewn to the front and the back. So I'll leave, it's about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch, and then we'll come over here, and this is just going to be a straight seam. So again, you don't need to add unless yours is too small. My vest is a little too small, so I'm probably, let's lay this out accurately. I added a little bit on this side, so I'm going to add a little bit on this side too. Not a ton more because it's also a bulkier one. And I could also take a straight edge, make our pattern much cleaner and much more professional looking, because this should be a straight seam. Oh my gosh, it's gonna look messy, but we're gonna get there. And then we can bring, which one we ended up here, so I'm gonna bring that out to that point and then bring it down. So if I move this away, you can see here's the front piece. So you can write front vest. So cut to mirror image. I can also take my straight edge and clean up. It's not too off over here, but it's always nice to have like a nice clean edge over here as well. And then that shoulder seam, do that. I know I have a curved ruler somewhere from school, but I'm gonna eyeball this. And because this vest like doesn't have to be super fitted, it's gonna be easy just to play with it and go from there. You don't have to be like so accurate like if you were making pants. If we were making jeans that were fitted, your pattern would need to be much more accurate than this, but this feels good to me. So here I have the front vest. This is going to be a left side and a right side. We're going to cut. So now I'm going to do the same thing and cut the back piece, which is just the full, whoops, I need my lid, the full piece. I'll show you that as well. So you need one of these and then a back piece. So let's cut that back piece now. I'm doing pretty much the exact same thing, but now we're tracing from the back piece. Make sure if you added length, we're going to add more length. We're going to add the same amount of length that we did on the front. And then this one, like I said, is going to be right on the fold. So I'm just going to line it up right to the edge of this paper. Let's see. Let's use the marker that you guys can actually see. Okay. So I did it like slightly longer. This also has a slight curve to it, so keep that in mind. I mean, you don't want anything too wonky when you're making a pattern, but, and then I did come out more, but it tapers in a little bit, so I'm just gonna do the same amount do it right up to my sleeve or my armhole. I guess there's no sleeve. I keep saying sleeve, but there's no sleeve. And now we're gonna trace this armhole. See if I can actually do it in a smooth way. There we go, beautiful. Okay, and same thing with our neckline here. So I'm gonna go over for my shoulder seam, and then around right here where that neck seam is. And I'm just gonna mark it on this side, mark it right here. And it doesn't come down a ton. You can kind of fold it back and see it right here too. And then it does that. I'm gonna do it just slightly so it's not like choking me. Okay, so super easy. Now I'm gonna write this on the fold. Cut on fold and vest back. Cut 1. So now I have both of those pattern pieces ready. And like I said earlier, it's always a good idea to test it out first with some cheaper fabric before you use your nicer fabric. But if you're confident in it, we can get going with that nice fabric. So now you should have your pattern pieces ready and cut out. I'm gonna set those off to the side and next get out my fabric and the batting that I'm gonna use. I am using this for my outside fabric and this for the inside fabric. I would like it to be reversible. That's part of using the binding that I think is so cool and fun, is using 2 fabrics to make a vest reversible. And then I'm just using some regular cotton batting that I have left over. These are just scraps left over. I'm going to be using this on the inside. So we want to first quilt the pieces however you want. Now I am going to be using the Baby Lock Sashiko and starting there. I'm not going to cut them out of the pattern pieces first. I'm going to do the quilting first, so that way any shrinkage that happens is done and over with. So that way once we cut our pattern pieces out, it's already accounted for and ready to go. So I'm going to make sure I have pieces cut out that are bigger than our pattern pieces, and I'll show you that too. But I'm going to go ahead and get the fabric sandwiched with our batting and get it ready to quilt.
The Baby Lock Sashiko gives this beautiful stitching that looks like hand stitching, even though it's not. It's all done on the machine, so it's super quick and easy. Once I got all of this quilting done, I then cut out my pattern pieces and stitched around them to get them ready for our next step.
So now we're going to attach our pieces together, and I made kind of a mistake, but actually I think it's going to work out in a good way. So this is one of my front pieces. This is my back piece. And when you put the shoulder seams together, you can see my front piece shoulder seam is a lot bigger. Now I could cut it down, the front one. It would obviously like leave more gap up here and not as much coverage, which would be fine. But my other thought, and what I did on this side, was I just created a pleat. So I thought I'd mention, if you did the same thing as I did, if your shoulder seams don't match up, I mean, you could go back to your pattern and fix that, or you could fix your pattern pieces, or you could create just a little pleat, which I just folded it over however much I needed to take out of it. And when I tried it on, it looked really good. So that's the first thing. Second thing, now when we are attaching the pieces together, I already did this shoulder seam. As you can see, it's going to be a little different than a regular one, and that's because I want it to be reversible. So you can see, like, you can barely tell there's a seam there. At least I can't from this video. It looks kind of wonkier on this side, but that's if you get really close and look at it. If you're not that like super close, it looks good. So it's called a flat felled seam, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It's a little different than a regular one, obviously, but I like the look of it, and it makes it so your seams are enclosed and you won't see any seams. So first you want to take your shoulder seam, and I'm putting them wrong sides together. So it's how I would wear it is what I'm doing right now. And like I said, I'm pleating mine or folding it in to fit my back piece. So see, I just like folded it a little bit. I'd say that's about 1/2 inch that I folded it. And so it's going to have this pleat, and I can iron that to make it like even lay nicer. But honestly, I have rounded shoulders, so I think it's going to fit better that way. This might be a new discovery for me and a good thing. So I'm going to sew that at 5/8 of an inch, just on my regular machine. I'm just going to sew it real quick and then show you our next step to finish it off. Make it look all pretty. Okay, so here is that seam I just sewed. Get all my extra threads out of here. I feel like I have a lot of threads going on, especially when you do quilting like this. It just adds a lot more. But okay, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now I'm gonna take this front one because it's bulkier, and I'm gonna trim that down to the seam, like, so that's like 1/8 of an inch, that seam allowance. I want to get that bulk out of there. So I have one of my seams like that, but one of them is still long, because this one, and this is a good time to use an iron. I actually didn't on the first one because I'm lazy and didn't want to get it out, but it probably would make a big difference. You want to fold this large seam allowance right here. We're going to fold that over about 1/4 of an inch, and then it's going to fold over again and cover our seam. So you're it kind of looks like a roll, like you're just rolling the seams in, and then we stitch on top of it, which gives us this nice double stitched look. Okay, I ironed it really good to show you guys, so hopefully it looks better, and then pinned it as well. So you just want to make sure you tuck this raw edge in. So this is where I'm going to start, and I'm just going to make sure that gets tucked in really nice, and then I'm going to sew right along this edge. You can see I have stitching there already. That's from after cutting out my pieces. I stitched just like a long stitch all around it to keep that quilting stitching in place. That was a lot of stitching words, but hopefully that makes sense. So I'll probably stitch this down and remove that stitch, but I'm going to make sure it's tucked really good. If you have a stiletto, which is like a piece of metal that helps kind of get these little pieces in, this is a really good time to use it, or just even a long sharp needle. Just make sure you don't actually stitch over it and break your needle. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this down. Mine's kind of uneven. You do want to make it even, so maybe I need to play with it a little more while I sew it. But I think I like the look of it, and I think it's gonna look good on the vest. I think like from far away, it just looks really nice. Lays really flat, really smooth. On the inside, it looks good. Yeah, looks really good on the inside. So I'm gonna take those stitches out, but then I'm doing the exact same things to my side seams as well. So wrong sides together, line this up. Luckily that mostly matches what I did.
stitch together at 5/8 of an inch, trim one, and then fold the other one over. After you have your side seams done, our next step is to finish off all of our seams. And we're going to do that by creating a bias binding and binding all of the seams. And then if you want ties, you can also use the bias binding as ties, or you could use twill tape. So I have a 20 by 20 inch square right here, and I'm going to cut it on the diagonal. So I'm just folding it from corner to corner, and then I'm going to cut it. And this is going to be just an easy way to make your own bias binding. If you want to buy packages like this, you can buy those. You just want, I have the extra wide. You can decide what size you want, and then you want double fold for the way that we're going to put it on. So there's also single fold, so just watch for that when you buy it. Once you have those cut out, you're going to take one of your pieces and we're going to lay it and match up this long edge right here. So it kind of looks like a pendant or a flag, but we're laying right sides together, and I'm going to stitch along here. So it's laying like this, and this is going to help us then cut our fabric on the bias. So I'm going to stitch that seam allowance right here. I'm just going to do a 1/4 of an inch for that seam allowance right here, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to cut it. Once you have this shape, our lovely parallelogram, then we're going to draw lines on it, and you want to make sure you're going on the bias. You don't want to, draw like this line right here, because that would just be straight. We're going through the parallelogram to create it on the bias, and I'm just doing 2-inch strips. You could do 2.5-inch strips if you want more of the bias tape to be seen. It's all about preference. So I just went along, you probably can't tell, but I have this green like friction marking tool, and I just drew the lines down all the way across. So now I have those on. So now comes kind of a tricky part. Even I have to like re-look up how to do this to make sure I'm doing it right. And sometimes I might not do it right. But now I'm going to attach these ends together so that we have a continuous strip of our bias tape when we cut it. If we just cut it out right now, we'd have all these strips, but then we'd have to sew them all together. This way we're sewing that one seam together and we're done. So, well, after cutting. So I'm going to line up my markings. So here's a line right here, here's a line, but I'm offsetting it by 1, because if you don't offset it, you're just going to cut one loop at a time, and that defeats the purpose of what we're actually doing. So I'm going to line it up right here, and I'm going to put it right sides together. I'm just showing you like this since it's easier that way, because it kind of looks funny, but I'm going to pick it up like this. You could also pin it, make it easier, and make sure things line up. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right across this and leave this little tail hanging out for that. So I sewed it offset. I had to do it once or twice because I think the first time it wasn't offset enough. I think I got it this time. So what I did is I followed the line to make sure it's going to be a continuous strand when I cut it. That's what we really want here. And I have this little piece right here that's just extra that I'm just gonna cut off. So now I'm just cutting on the line, and and definitely check it, make sure it's going to be continuous before you start cutting it. Once you have your bias strip cut out, then I'm using a bias making tool. If you don't have these, obviously you don't necessarily need it. This just helps it so it folds the fabric for you to get this fold right here, and then you would fold it again to get the double fold. And I'm going to iron that while I do it. So I just pull it through. Sometimes it doesn't stay in the slot that I need it to, but if you just slowly pull it through and iron it down, it makes making bias tape pretty easy. So if you make it frequently, these are really handy to have, and they come in all different sizes as well. So I'm just ironing it so that the raw edges meet in the middle, like so. And then once that's done, I'll iron it again and fold it in half, and that will give us our bias tape. Okay, once you have all your bias tape ready to go, I actually don't know if I made enough. I might need to make more, and depending on your size, that's going to determine how much you need. So at this point, I don't know, but I'm going to start sewing it on. And let's see. Okay, so we want one end of it. I'm just going to start on the back and see how far I can go, because obviously we're just going to do a continuous around the hem and then go down the side of it, the front of the side, oh my gosh, the front piece, that side piece, and then the neckline as well. We're just finishing everything off with this bias tape, and I think it's gonna look so good. I'm actually gonna, we'll get to it. I shouldn't say, I'm gonna use my Sashiko on the real finish of the bias tape, which I think will look so good. I'm so excited. Okay, so I'm just going to use my normal machine on this part. I'm leaving about a 4 to 5 inch tail on the end, and I'm just going to start in the middle of the back. I'm opening the bias tape up, and that first fold, I'm going to stitch right on that first fold, because that will then be folded up and come around. So actually, now that I say that, I'm going to stitch on the red side of mine, because I want the Sashiko stitching. When I do that, I want it on this. So if you're going to machine stitch your binding down and you have like a right side, you want to start with the bias tape on the wrong side. And that'll all make sense once we get farther in. So laying it against the raw edge and just stitching along on that fold, which that fold should be 1/2 inch if it was folded correctly. So I'm just going to go along, and I'll pivot at the corners and go from there. Okay, so once I come back to where I started, I'm going to do something a little different. I think it's going to be fine. You can join the ends of your binding. I am just going to fold them over the top of each other. So the first one that I had, I trimmed it a little bit, so it's just like 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And I'm going to fold the edge of it in so there's no raw edge left over. And then I'm going to take this strip that we're still on and finish it off and come right over the top of it. So that way they'll just kind of sandwich each other in. So I'll finish that off, meet up with the other stitching that I started at, my starting stitching. Let's see, just go a little ways past it and back stitch, and then I can take that out, trim my threads. And then I'm going to trim off the rest of that bias tape. that I don't need anymore. And maybe I have enough for armhole. Maybe one. So then this will get folded over. So see how, because we folded that, there's no raw edge. It's going to look really nice. And then we're ready to take our bias and fold this part over to cover our stitching that we just did. And like I said earlier, I'm going to finish this off by stitching right along here with my Sashiko. If you want to do hand stitching or even your machine stitching, you could do something like that as well to finish that off. And I'm going to do the same exact thing with the armholes. And the reason we did this bias tape is so that we can go around the neck holes, the armholes, and this bias tape will stretch a little bit and work and lay nicely. And when you're finished, give it a good steam pressed. That bias binding on. One thing that you want to think about or decide before you fold it over and finish off that is if you want to make ties. So it's very popular right now to do like 3 ties down the front. I'm not a huge fan of all the bows. I think they would just accentuate the front of me. I don't know. I think they look cute on some people, but I'm just not as big of a fan as I know most people are. So I'm just gonna do 1 set of ties to give it a little bit of dimension. And you could do it like at the top. You could do 3 down the front, 4 down the front. It would be cute. I think it's cute. I just don't like it on me is what I'm saying. So I'm gonna decide once I get to it. Okay, so I used my bias binding. I just stitched the bias binding closed. I folded the ends in so there's no raw edge anymore. This side has a raw edge because when I get to finish off the binding that we sewed on, I'm going to go down and stitch this down. And wherever I decide to put my ties, I'm going to stick the tie in to the binding and then stitch it down. So it just sits like this. That's the best way that I've seen how to do it. I know you could also do, you could also just top stitch it on there as well, but I like that it's kind of hidden, that raw edge is hidden in the bias as well. And I think whichever way you wear it, you're obviously gonna be able to tie it either way. So I'm gonna stitch it that way, and I'll probably do it towards the middle. I'll probably try it on and then decide where I want it, but that's probably pretty accurate to where I'm going to stitch it on. And I'll pin it in place and then stitch it down. I'm trying to decide. I might actually stitch it in place just in the seam allowance before I even do this so that it holds it extra nicely, because the Sashiko stitch isn't going to be like a super strong stitch, so if I tie it super hard, it might pop those stitches, if that makes sense. So I think I will go in and just sew it right here. Let's see if I can try it on for you guys without having to like readjust the camera and everything. Okay. I'm like freezing right now, so I want to wear this like right now. Okay, so this is how it's going to lay. Super cute. I like that it has a little bit of overlap. I haven't done my sleeves yet. So, and if you feel like this needs to be cut, you could even cut more into your sleeve too. So try it on beforehand. But like I said, it'll probably be down towards the middle-ish that I do my tie. Yeah, so probably like right here. I think like right underneath my bust, so that it would lay just right down here. And I ended up curving, well, that one I didn't, this one I did. I ended up curving that edge. Oh, maybe it wasn't even that one. Oh my gosh. Oh, it was this one. Okay, so this one I ended up curving the edge. I'm going to trim that corner piece off and then when I stitch it, it'll just be curved. I just thought that was a nice little touch instead of doing those sharp corners. I liked that. And I'll probably do it up here as well.
Okay guys, once you're done attaching your bias binding on all of those raw edges, you are done with your vest. I love how this turned out. I love that I made it like my size so it can fit. It has a little bit of overlap, which I like. I don't want the gapping a ton. And it fits really, really nicely. This was a great project to do to make my own pattern, which was also really fun to show you guys how to do. The only thing I would change is I would add pockets, which I could go back and add pockets. So we'll see, maybe that'll happen. I like the option of just the one tie, but and the fact that it's reversible, how fun. So I hope your vest turned out just as fun and just as cute. Make sure to tag me and share your finished product with me. I would love to see it. Make sure to check out my links down below, especially for the Baby Lock Sashiko. This really made the project extra special. I just love the little details that it left on the binding, and then this beautiful quilting it did on this fabric and made the fabric pop a little bit more. So if you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave them down below in the comment section, and make sure to subscribe for more sewing tutorials, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.